Get started here at 7 o'clock. We've got a little bit of ground to cover and try to spend some time sharing things. So we'll try to utilize as much of the hour or a little over that we've got. I'd like to start off and thank everybody for joining in tonight to the insights from the 2023 growing season. I want to say thank you for making time to tune in. Most of you are I'm familiar with, but maybe a few new people. My name is Mark Rothermich. I'm product specialist with Genesis Ag in the central part of the U.S. I've been with Genesis since about 2015, and I'm really happy to have some of the other leaders of Genesis Ag join me tonight. We've got Phillip Davis. He and his son Josh, they're the founders and owners of Genesis Ag. So really happy to have them here. And then Chris Allison's with us. He's our tech guy who's going to be helping us out with recording everything and keeping things moving. So as I kind of mentioned in the lead up to it, the purpose of the webinar tonight is twofold. As we prepare, or in some cases we've begun harvest, I wanted to share with you some of the responses we've seen during the growing season in hopes that you'll watch for results in your own fields. And then the second portion, we're going to be discussing a few subjects you might look forward to as you prepare for next season. Some ideas to contemplate while you're sitting in the combine, the grain cart, or the grain truck this fall. During the webinar, for the attendees, if you have any questions, you should have a chat box there available to you. We just ask that you if you've got a question, put it in a chat box. If you could, whenever you put that in there, you might make a note of what we were talking about at the time, just so as a reference for us when we go to answer that, we'll have a better idea, really kind of what that question might pertain to. So I'd like to start this evening just with each of us giving a little roundup. Kind of, we've chatted here before we started, but maybe give a little bit more roundup of the conditions that we've seen throughout the season, just so everybody kind of has a handle, since we do cover quite a bit of the country with the territories that the three of us cover. For myself, I think it's probably been one of the most erratic years I've ever seen across the 5 states that I work in: Iowa, Nebraska, Missouri, Kansas, and Oklahoma. A lot of us had really good planting conditions when we went to the field, probably one of the driest starts to the year. So planting conditions seemed fantastic. Depending on when we started, we might have gotten hit with a little bit of cold weather to get things started. But the rainfall has probably been one of the spottiest I've ever seen in my life. And I think it's going to create some challenges as we go into harvest. It's going to be very difficult, I think, in a lot of my region for us to do comparisons on different treatments and different things. If we have farms that are a few miles apart, and maybe in some instances, even from one side of the field to the other, they might have gotten totally different rainfall scenarios. So it's going to be really interesting. And I think it's going to take a lot of, a little bit more concentration as we look back at our yield maps and yield results to really see what, make sure that we're getting an apples to apple comparison with things. So that's kind of a little bit of a roundup of what I've had. Phillip or Josh, do you guys want to jump in and share maybe what you've been seeing?
Well, Mark, I'll kind of start because it's just like you were asking a minute ago. We were in the northeastern part of the United States this past week, and we would go in an area that was extremely dry, and then we would go just like an hour's drive away, and it was lush green. But one of the things that we have saw on these farms, Mark, is management's played into it. And when I say management, it could be management of where the higher organic matter, the more biological activity. But I will just kind of bang on that same drum that you have already hit on, that it's really some tremendous weather swings from one part of the country to the other. Even down I was in the panhandle of Oklahoma about 3 weeks ago, and where they've got water, ample water, it's okay. But if they got a well that's kind of only producing 400 to 800 gallons a minute, that crop is suffering because of the heat stress that they've went under. But and we've also saw in places that are on our biological program, seems like they've been able to withstand some of that stress better. And I know you've, Mark, have got some pictures and things like that you're going to share, but I will just kind of say that through the whole, from East Coast to West Coast, that the weather has really played a part in this crop. And I don't know if it's as strong. I didn't hear the report today when it came out, if they're still saying it's strong or it's went down, but I don't think it's going to be as good a crop as we normally would have across the board.
Okay, very good. Josh, you have some things you want to add there?
Yeah, a lot of guys I work with actually been very dry since really this time last year. Had a really good harvest last fall, and then went all winter and all spring without really a good ground freeze and ample moisture, and it really looked to set us back in our stands and everything early in the season. And kind of like what my dad was saying, you could see a spot that maybe might be higher organic matter, or a certain practice that may have influenced a better stand or whatnot. But really looking at a full spectrum, even back as far as the year to date, not just the growing crop, to look at the overall perspective of what we're about to run through our own combines here yet this fall, of saying, okay, what's been presented to me since the time I was doing this last year, to really make a good synopsis on the results and what we're looking at going through a 2023 harvest.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a year where soil quality, soil properties are going to show up big in a lot of fields for sure. So it's like I said, it's going to be an interesting fall, just as it's been an interesting year. So, well, let's go ahead. At this point, I think we'll jump in and start talking a little bit about some of the responses that we have seen this year. This will be the first thing we're going to talk about a little bit, is our biological program. Most guys are utilizing in my region as the biological program. Kind of the baseline would be Carbos, which is our energy source, Revita N, which is our mainline biological, and then Morphos, which is, as the name implies, designed to help us create a little bit more phosphorus in the plants. But as Phillip alluded to, a lot of where we're using the Revita N, we seem to be seeing a lot more resilience in the crop. And this is a slide that Chris brought up here that we're showing. This is from one of my customers in Iowa. And this particular crop, this picture was taken on, I think it was August the 21st or 22nd. The crop was planted the first couple of days of May in kind of north central Iowa. Like Josh mentioned, kind of a lot of the area went through the winter in pretty dry conditions after they utilized most of their soil or their water stockpiles last year. Went through a pretty dry winter. And this particular field that we're looking at here, they had only picked up 4.8 inches of rain from planting the 1st of May until I think it was about the 4th of August. They did finally catch some rain, and they did pick up about 5 inches of rain in that about a week period. So they did kind of get a little recharge there. But this particular, this field had been through almost 3 months with pretty limited water. And the producer has 2 fields where he's utilized our biological program. And he said that, and this is a photo of one of those fields, you can see while the crop is showing a little stress, it's certainly not in dire trouble. And he shared with us, Phillip, when we were there, that the rest of the fields in their operation where they hadn't used our biological program did not seem to be holding up as well. So that's kind of one of the examples I had. Anything from either of you guys that you'd like to share at this point in things that you might have seen in particular?
Well, Mark, that day that we were out together and we stepped over into an area the guy did not use our biological program. And you and I remarked that it seemed a little bit, the temperature seemed to be a little bit higher in that area. And so we went back over into the area that had the biological program. And I said, Mark, this crop is still transpiring, even though it was 103 degrees. We were cooler in the crop canopy. So when I say that crop was still respirating and it really hadn't shut down. And when we walked into the area that the Infura program had not been put, that crop to me had shut down. So that's one of the things that we saw there on that farm that we were working on that day. And we continue to see this in other regions as well.
Yeah. Josh, you have anything that you've seen that you want to mention?
Biology in the soil, you overcome a lot of adversity. So looking at what the measuring stick is of how we're trying to utilize products, is it always yield? Yeah, that's what is going to pay for the use of the product. But looking at the transition of getting a soil where it's a lot of the less stress issues that can make a crop or a soil thrive in an adverse condition. A lot like you mentioned earlier, rainfall's been erratic. You get too much and then you go a period without. A healthy soil can overcome a lot of that. It's not going to grow, but if we can extend the healthiness and vibrance of the plant through biology for 1, 2, 3, even 10 more days through a stress period, that's a home run as far as the product use. Now, there's always a variable in what the harvest yield is within that. But if we look at how characteristics can change, that's really what we're wanting to look at.
Yeah, we've talked for years about a lot of times when you start with a biological program, we start looking at different measuring sticks for measuring progress. And certainly resilience during stress and late season plant health is a big component of that. So, Chris, let's go ahead and jump to the next slide if we could. So this is you guys might be familiar with this. This was a teaser I put out the end of last week in regards to things we were going to share here on the webinar this evening. A lot of us, I probably saw more, despite all of the stress, the what we perceived as stress on our crops throughout the early part of their lives. When we got to pollination, I don't know if I'd ever seen an instance where there were as many double ears across my entire region in as many fields as what I saw this year that were, and oftentimes those second ears actually pushed through and pollinated. Now, I haven't been out in all of those fields yet. The few that I have, I would say that very few of those scenarios have we had a significant amount of those second ears survive. But as I went to Oklahoma last week, this particular producer had this scenario. So what the boards are showing here on top, those are ears that from plants that just had a single ear on them. The board on the bottom, I'm showing you, so the ear on the left would be the primary ear, and then the one next to it would be the secondary. So that's kind of the alternation across the 7 plants. And you can see that some of those second ears are actually pretty significant. So I thought it would be interesting to do my ear assessment on these and try to determine really does that second ear, because we expect that we're going to probably take some kernels or weight off of that primary ear if we produce a second ear. So I wanted to see what we could see with that. So Chris, if you'll jump to the next slide for me. So this is what we came up with, and hopefully this makes sense to you, but I'll just kind of run through it real quick. He had a field right across the field road. One side had drip irrigation, the other side was still dry land. They were planted at different populations. So the drip irrigated side, he had dropped 22,000. He had 21.7 for a final stand in that field. So the ears that I pulled off of those plants with just the single ear, you can see the ear weight was 9.63 ounces. When I pulled the ears from the plants with 2, so in there, he actually had 11.5% of the plants, and I counted 1/100 of an acre to come up with this. So it wasn't just a really small stretch. This was pretty consistent, but he had 11.5% of the plants had a second ear. So what he actually had was 19,200 plants that had a single ear or had the primary, sorry, he had 19,200 ears that were just a single, and then he had 2,500 that were second ears. Okay, let me back up. The primary ear on that plant there were 19,200 of those. And they weighed 8.3 ounces. So you can see we gave up a little over an ounce per ear on that, but the second ears on those weighed 4.87 ounces. So when you carry that down with the populations to the resulting yield, you can see that in the drip irrigation, the plants with just a single ear would have yielded 233, whereas the plants with double ears would have yielded 242. So those ears did result in a benefit there. On the dry land, you can see his population was just a little bit lower. It probably compensated just a little bit with the irrigation in the plants that had 2 ears actually had a little bit better weight to them. But even in the dry land, you can see those second ears did still result in about a 7 bushel yield increase that I showed for him. So in this particular case, the second ears are a plus. And I think one of the questions that's always been in my mind is, do we lose enough off of a primary ear typically trying to do anything with a secondary? But in this case, I don't know, to me, it looks like it might have been a benefit. Phillip, you or Josh have any thoughts on that one at all?
Not for me, Mark. That's pretty self-explanatory there.
Okay. So this is another thing I came across this year. This was in Iowa with a producer. Heath has been working with us for a few years. He's got a field that he deals with some pretty hot spot, high pH areas in it. And what you're seeing here in this picture is an example of what he would typically have. This little hot spot he said is probably running somewhere between 9.5 and 10, or maybe even 10.5 on pH. And he's been under a regimen of doing some soil applications with some of our products, some of our biologicals, as well as some foliar applications, trying to help boost these soybean plants out of their challenges. He shared with me, while you see 2 rows here that look severely affected, the rest of the field around it looks pretty good. And he shared with me that typically there'd be about 10 acres starting from where these 2 rows are, extending out into that field, that would be severely impacted. And I actually shot a video of this that I'll post later on, that you can't tell anywhere that that those soybeans are being impacted nearly to the extent that they typically would. So it's really interesting what things Heath has been able to do and what things he's doing to try to overcome that challenge. Have either of you guys seen results like that in some high pH areas in the past as well?
Well, one of the things, Mark, and you know, I work a lot out in some of the higher pHs out in the plain states, and we're finding this to be true, because what right in the if you want to call it the rhizosphere, when that young seedling starts, is these root exudates, if we're sending those out, have the ability to mitigate some of that higher pH. And so I think as we get more of the biology in there, you're definitely going to see a benefit. We are seeing a benefit even on those calcareous soils in the Western Plains.
Mm-hmm. And he shared with me, he actually kind of did kind of a split scenario where he had applied some Revita N, and then on another portion he used Revita N and Morphos to see if one or the other had more of an impact. And where he used the Revita N versus nothing, the beans outgrew it about 7 days ahead. Where he had put the Morphos with the Revita N, they actually greened up 2 weeks before the untreated. So a significant difference in how his crops responded there. So I thought that was really interesting. I really appreciated him sharing with me what he had seen and giving me an opportunity to come by and get that. So if anybody here is battling some high pH scenarios, be happy to kind of share some of the things that he's been doing to combat that. So, okay, Chris. Yeah, so we're going to jump now into Zenergy. It's our inoculant for corn and grass crops. A lot of you are kind of familiar with this. You've heard me talk about it a little bit. We'll zip through this pretty quickly, Chris. So this is a producer, again, in Iowa that I work with, has been working with our program for a few years. But what you're seeing here, these are roots dug up on June the 14th. So the plants had been in the ground since early May. Again, it was a planting date. On the left, you can see the in-furrow program, and not a bad root system. But when you look at the Zenergy plant on the right, just a much more massive root system, bigger roots, bright white roots, just very common for what we see with the Zenergy product. So go ahead and let's jump to the next one, Chris. So this is the same fields then on July the 10th. You can see that the plants are bigger, the root mass is bigger, but still that Zenergy program is continuing to expand that root system. Josh, we talked a lot this winter about how important the strong root system is, because it is the stomach and the lifeblood of our plants.
Yeah, and to kind of follow up on that is, and I know a lot of you guys heard me say at our winter meeting that Mark did, is how important the roots were. Everybody wants to look at tissue as being a majority in season checklist to say, okay, I've got enough nutrient in the plant, but most of us aren't looking as in-depth at the roots as what we need to be, because the roots are what's carrying those nutrients into the plant. And that's where, I mentioned guys send me pictures of crops and say, well, what do you think? I'm like, well, dig some plants up and show me the roots. Now, I understand after about knee high that that's very difficult to do unless you take a track hoe out in the field and dig it up. But really getting the start that we want to get with a really good root system, the roots should continue to grow unless we get adverse conditions along the same parameters as what they start out until reproduction starts.
Mhm. Exactly. Okay, Chris, let's go ahead and we'll make another step. So most of you guys are familiar with our Carbos product. It is our energy source, food source for our biology that we utilize throughout the season. I think it's extremely important during our in-furrow portion of our system. But we're finding more and more how much we can impact our plants in season with using this. And this is a scenario that one of our producers, again, this was actually Heath, last year in doing some additional testing with Carbos at higher rates, had seen some really good responses in his crops with more regular applications and higher rates. And when I say higher rates, I think a lot of us, Phillip and Josh, we've kind of migrated to thinking that we might have been underutilizing Carbos a little bit in the past and what it can do. So a lot of my guys this year have bumped their rates up to 8 ounces per acre, especially with some of their foliar applications. And one of my producers that works with some other people in Iowa, Andrew, shared with me that one of his people, when he was doing his fungicide application on soybeans, had a portion of the field where he hadn't used Carbos, and then he put it in. And he said 2 days after he applied, where he had used the Carbos, the beans were a much darker green, and they maintained that for about 5 days. And it caught his attention enough. He actually went back out after that and made a separate application just with Carbos to see what kind of impact that might have. So my thoughts, and I'll ask you guys to see if you agree or kind of where you're at, but I think we're missing out, especially during times of stress when our plants start shutting down, when that photosynthetic, that sugar factory shuts down. We're not feeding our biology. The plants aren't feeding the biology as strongly. So coming in with Carbos at a strong rate, jump starting and keeping that biology flourishing, I think is having a big impact on our crops. What would you guys say to that?
Well, it's all about energy. It's like any of us going out and doing our daily chores on the farm every day. If we don't have the energy we have, we're not as efficient as we need to be. So our crop is much the same way. If it doesn't have the energy it needs, it can't produce the pods, can't produce the kernels, can't produce the finished fruit that we're desiring. We may get in the range of what we're looking at, but we may not maximize our potential. I think we need to look at it the same way. Not saying we need to apply Carbos every day, but given the opportunity, I would say in a 3-week span, Carbos could be very advantageous for us to do in those 3-week windows, if we have the ability. If not, it's whenever we go across, it's how critical that energy is, especially at the given time the growth stage of the crop is in.
Okay, very good. Thanks, Josh. Yeah, and I agree. I mean, it is about energy. It's about energy to the plants and energy to the microbes in the soil profile and everywhere, and that energy that we can provide for them. Okay, Chris, let's go ahead and jump over. We're going to talk a little bit about Instago now. This is a new product that we introduced this winter, and there's quite a bit of it being put out in testing this year. I can't say that I've had any potential yet to get any yield results, but I think Phillip, you and or Josh might have something to share with this.
Yeah, we did some studies last year, gentlemen, with this, and we had some really good responses with some of the rated fungicides in the industry. And so were quite shocked with it that we had performed that well. In fact, even some of the people doing the testing were shocked that a biological product could do as well as some of these top rated fungicides. So we got it in several more scenarios this year. I'm going to be going up into southern Minnesota and Wisconsin the end of the month. We've got some white mold studies going on up there of where we've run a couple of scenarios of running it in furrow. We've run it at the fifth trifoliate, then at R1. But you guys know that white mold is introduced into that plant very early. Typically on those first blooms, those lower blooms is where it enters into the plant and what starts causing problems. So we're looking at it in a couple scenarios there. I have some guys that actually, because of the results we had in corn last year, and how everyone is looking at a fungicide early in that plant cycle of corn, is they wanted to look at putting this in furrow. So it being a biological product, it should not affect our native beneficial fungi. And I asked a researcher about putting their fungicide on corn in the seed trench, and I asked this person, I said, how does it affect our beneficial fungi? And the answer I got was, well, we don't hurt the beneficial. And I said, well, show me some of your documentation. And they said, well, that's what we were trained. We were trained that it didn't interfere with the beneficial, natural beneficial fungi that's there. So that's one of the things I'm excited about Instago. But we did see our best results applied at V10 last year. In the corn, we're running those same studies this year in the corn. So we're excited about what we may see there. And I know Josh has got some studies out that he's working with as well.
Chris, did we have another slide behind this? There we go. That's not mine, so I'm going to defer to either Josh or Phillip on this one.
Okay, I'll take this because this is what we have been working with, and we're looking here at potatoes where we've done a biological program in furrow. So now we have to understand, gentlemen, this has multiple of our products on there. It's not just an Instago. So there's multiple Genesis products in here. There's Morphos, there's Revita in the seed trench here along with the Instago. So that's just showing you though that with a biological program you can do as well as the typical program in Idaho on potatoes. Now we will be getting some of the yield data probably in another 4 weeks out of these studies. So we'll be able to be getting that on the website and showing you guys. But fungicides in potatoes, I mean, there's as high as 7 applications during a growing cycle of commercial fungicides. What we're looking at, first of all, is growing a safer product for human consumption rather than putting a skull and crossbone in there with that seed piece, which to me, the plant uptakes it, and that's what keeps the plant healthy. And then it has to get into the tuber itself. So I would be more interested in eating a potato from the one on the left and the one on the right here.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this product myself, Philip, because of the fact that it does work in the soil as well as in and on the plant. When you and I were traveling back a few weeks ago from our little travels, that was about the 21st, 22nd of August. And I saw a lot of fields, soybean fields already at that point that were starting to show issues with, we didn't stop and look specifically, but, we had seen some white mold where we had been. I'm assuming that a lot of those fields that were starting to show up were sudden death. I know there's a lot of talk of bean diseases cropping up this year. And I think this product, especially with repeated use over the years, building that community of beneficial biology in the system, I think we can have a real impact on some of those diseases, especially ones that carry over in the soil.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there, Mark. And we're going to go into a product here in a minute that I'm going to, it's just an idea that I have, but what we're looking at, you used a key word there, and I don't know if we all caught that, but I'm going to use it again, or I'll say phrase. You said repeated use. And that's one of the things we're seeing with the guys that are on our program, staying on our program, and continuing to work with us in our program, is things get better. I was in a combine in Northern Virginia last week, a week ago Monday, and these gentlemen had worked with us before, and so they took a 2-year sabbatical. And so they came back to us, and so I worked with them again this spring, and their father is a year younger than me. So I know Josh can relate very heavily, and Trent can relate because of Troy. I think they're on the call. But so when you're working with your father, it's quite a struggle. So they said, well, we're going to do this. And so we're there in the combine. And so we're running, and the whole field averaged, because I talked to him, 263 bushels. And this is the northern part of Virginia. They were very challenged this year for moisture. This is a non-irrigated field, and went through a lot of stress. And the older gentleman, he made several comments. He said, he says, you cost me a lot of my friends. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, all my guys I was buying fertilizer from said they won't hardly speak to me now because we didn't buy as much fertilizer. And I said, well, that wasn't much of a friend, was it? And he kind of looked at me. So in this field, there was a total of 150 pounds of nitrogen applied, because I had talked to these guys and I said, look, if you're going to follow this program, you have to be really cautious. We don't want you to front load our nitrogen. I said, the corn will not be as dark green. I said, it won't be as lush. It won't be as vegetative. But I said, what we're wanting to do is we're wanting to build yield. So one of the local co-ops, they were at I think it was a reunion or something, or a wedding banquet or whatever around the 1st of June. And so he called Peyton out. He said, Peyton, he says, boy, that corn there at your house, he says, it looks like, and he used some descriptions of what and Peyton was kind of somewhat embarrassed, but he said, let's just see how it looks in the end. And so I was up there. They have the only green corn that's in that entire county, and they're harvesting their corn before the other guys. It's dried down quicker. They're some of the first ones to harvest. And so they're getting a premium because of the poultry market up there. But their corn is, the top above the ear is still green, but the corn is, I think they were 23% when we were harvesting up there. But what the real story was, is we hit an area there, and he said, now this next cut that we go into is where I come in just to appease my dad, and we put on another 100 units of N. He said that brought us up to the typical application rate that we put on corn up here was 250 pounds. So we, like I said, the whole field averaged 263 bushel. We were seeing about 275 in the area that we were in. We go into that area that he had applied that additional nitrogen, and the yield monitor was showing about 234 to 236 bushels. So I asked Peyton, I said, what did that extra nitrogen cost you? He said, well, about $100. Let's just round it off and say about $100. I said, well, what's corn selling for up here today? And he said, we're getting a little bit of premium on this because of the poultry. He says we're getting $645. So you guys can run those numbers yourself. When I get out of the combine and go talk to the older gentleman, and I can use that term because I'm a year older than him. So that when I went and talked to the old man, I said, what do you think? And he was on cloud 9 because of he hadn't spent that other $100 on nitrogen, and where he had been, now they would have been making good corn at 236 bushels. But it was a far cry from what the whole farm yielded. So that's just some of the things we're seeing. And when you said repeated use, Mark, I think we get better with age. And when I say that, the more years that someone's been on our program, the more resilience we see, especially in a stressful year like we've just been through.
Mm-hmm. You bet. You bet. Well, thanks for that, Phillip. It's a pretty interesting perspective. So, Chris, okay, good job. So now we're going to jump in. We've still got a little bit of time here, but we'll try to move through this pretty quickly. Talk about some things for you guys to think about moving into 2024. Chris, you want to go ahead and jump to the next one? This is, a lot of you are familiar. We've got several micronutrient products as well as foliar N, a foliar P, and a foliar K product. So this is a guy that I work with up in Nebraska. He's actually has a consulting business, and Scott was doing a lot of different testing, trying to maintain his tissue test levels throughout the year. So he worked with several of our products in small plots, and he was doing weekly tissue testing. So what we're looking at here, if you kind of glance at this, if we start in the upper left-hand corner, you can see on the potassium, he had actually irrigated with flood irrigation there, that where you see that initial pop on the potassium, and then it fell, and he applied 0.7 of a gallon of our foliar K, and you can see he got a nice bump in in at that stage. Going down to the boron, and this would have been with stable B. He's a big proponent. He's seen really good results with that product up in his area. And you can see here where he did 2 applications throughout the season. And, he's getting a couple week really good response out of that product. Jumping over to the right, the top right with the phosphorus, he did a foliar application with a quart of the Fulcrum P. That's not a whole lot to apply. It was early in the season, but you can see he got a really nice jump for a couple weeks out of that application there. The bottom right with the manganese, again, a couple of applications trying to maintain those levels a little bit more through the season. Again, he's getting a couple week pretty consistent response when he's utilizing our products. And then in the center is our Fulcrum N, our nitrogen foliar product. And Scott did an application here. He was probably just a little, I'm going to guess he was probably just pre-tassel on that. And you can see he got a kind of a little uptick and a bump out of that. And really a half a gallon at that stage of the crop's life is not a tremendous amount of nitrogen. But you can see he got a couple week pop out of that. And Phillip and Josh, as we've started utilizing these products between our Fulcrum nutrients and some of our specialty micronutrients that you guys are putting together for us out of the Fulcrum lineup, we're seeing a lot of these kind of responses where small amounts of our products are replacing significant amounts of more conventional products. And I just like for you to talk a little bit. We've kind of got some evidence here to show people, hey, we're getting some good responses. But we've talked in the last couple of years about the ability for producers who may have certain needs at planting time or throughout the season. They may have certain micronutrients that they really like to use or they need to use, and sometimes maybe even combinations of them. And we've got the ability to tailor custom blend products. Could you guys share just real briefly, because we've got a couple other things to run through here, but could you guys give us a quick hit maybe on what we've got to offer there?
Well, we've got the NP and K, which I think a lot of guys on the call probably dabbed in looking at ways to use those. They're great efficiency tools to get away from the conventional commercial dump fertilize and actually give the crop what it needs at a specific time. And in saying that, it can fall over into specific nutrients, micronutrients specifically, to do the same thing. And we've got a couple things that we can add to that, like what make the NP and K product special, or something like the humic line that we've got, adding that to nutrients just to make it more plant receptive and getting a better bang for your buck. Now we can tailor something specifically to a farm if there's enough volume there to do it. We do have some minimum volumes, so if any of you guys are interested, just talk to Mark about that and we can kind of work from there. But really, we can give you guys whatever you need. We've not really pushed that as hard as we should have in the past. We really just kind of said, well, go get whatever you can get locally. But the more we've done that, the more we've realized the quality issues, the compatibility issues, and the availability of trying to say, hey guys, use this nutrient, and we've not pushed ourselves out there as having a premium product to offer.
Yeah, so what we're really trying to encourage is if you're a producer that, as I said, you've got nutrients that you rely on, and you might currently be trying to mix a couple of different things at different, at planning time or something like that. If you have an interest in maybe getting a custom blend where they're all put together, we need to do that. We need to start that conversation this fall. Start talking about what that blend might look like, because it's not something we can just throw together tomorrow and provide to you, but with a little bit of heads up where we can work on it, through this winter. And because Josh, it has to have a little testing done right before. I mean, you kind of need to prove that it's going to stay in blended and everything. Is that correct?
Yes, we do need to do a couple processes of bench testing, and we also need to know if you're going to mix this with certain things, what those would be. I know we've had a couple deals where we've sent a product out and assumptions have been made that things could happen, and we may, through what information you guys provide, we may make a product that's premium and tailored to what you're asking for, but it may run into a compatibility issue with like a phosphate or something like that. The phosphate specifically is what I would be referring to. So we kind of need to have a full disclosure when you guys have this conversation with Mark. Okay, what am I going to be mixing it with? How am I going to be using it? And so on and so forth. That way we know how to chelate it, what basis to use, and all of that. So definitely be full disclosure with Mark as these conversations happen.
Yeah. Very good. Well, thanks for that, Josh. Okay, Chris, let's go ahead and jump to the next one. So you guys have heard me speak about the total nutrient density soil tests that we have available. Just kind of wanted to throw a couple of examples up because we've talked a lot. Most of you have heard me kind of share my analogy that if you think about phosphorus, which is probably the one that we're all more familiar with, that, P1 is what I refer to as what's in my glass. What's in my glass that is available for me to drink. P2 is kind of what's in the pitcher that I could refill the glass with. But we know that that's not the end of what's out there. That's not everything that's there. So this total nutrient density test gives us a look into what's in the well that we can refill the pitcher and refill the glass with. And that's not just with phosphorus. That's just the one we're most familiar with. But that goes for all of the nutrients that are important to our crops. So I'm just going to run through a couple of examples because most of us have this fear that we're going to short our crop if we back off any at all. To me, this is just a great way to set a baseline, and then as we work with biology, see how much we can change the available components. But we'll just look briefly at this one. This is actually a test from Missouri. If you look at the second line down at the phosphorus, the extractable result is 93, and that's pounds per acre. So this producer's got 93 pounds per acre in what would be considered a P1 test. But he's got 602 pounds in the profile, and this is a 0 to 8 inch profile. Potassium, you can see he's got 175 in the available component, 952 in reserve. And as you go down through those nutrients across the board, you can see there's a huge stockpile out here in our soils that biology is actually the most efficient way of accessing. So Chris, let's go ahead and jump to the next one real quick. This one comes from Kansas. I'm just kind of doing a snapshot of a few of the states that I've worked in, just to let you know that while some of us think, well, that only pertains somewhere else, kind of wanted to let you see here. On this one from Central Kansas, the P1 essentially is 27. In the profile, there's 680. On potassium, he's got 567 pounds available and 5,600 pounds in the profile. And again, if you went down through there, you're going to see a lot of those nutrients, tremendous differences. Okay, Chris, jump to the next one. So this one is from kind of central Iowa. This is from 0 to 8 inches. You can see P1 is 86. Total in the profile is 856. So about 10% of the total phosphorus in his profile is all that he has available. On potassium, he's got 514 available and a total in the profile of 2782. But when I say profile, I want to put a little asterisk by that because that's in the 0 to 8 inch profile. Go ahead and jump to the next slide. We decided to run this test and pull from a little deeper. So this is in that same field, right down the same probe. This would be 8 to 16 inches in this producer's field. In that 8 to 16 inch range, he's got 41 pounds of phosphorus available, 714 in the profile. Potassium, he's got 253 available and 2,300. If you start adding those up, most of us, our soils allow our roots to go more than 8 inches deep. Now, while our plants probably do obtain a lot of their nutrients from the upper level, I have to believe that if God put all those nutrients down deeper, that those plants have some way of accessing that as well. So when you start putting those numbers together, there are huge stockpiles of nutrients out here in our system. So I'd like for you guys to think about maybe running some of these tests this fall. They are about $100, $105 a piece to do, but some great information that creates a great baseline to build some things on. So Chris, let's go ahead and jump to the next one real quick. And I'm going to pass this one off to Phillip. I think you've got some things to share here on Exodus real quick.
Yeah, we started looking at this as a residue decomposer, but that may be the wrong term for it. And I think it's a fall biological product. When I say this could be better than your cover crop, I think if we go to these next page pictures here, this is from a farm just south of the Twin Cities in Minnesota. And I sent it to him. I think we sent it out to 2 farmers this past fall. One of them, I think it's still sitting on the shelf, so I don't know that it actually got to do what it was supposed to do. But anyway, I sent it up to him and I said, well, he's north. He's tried to do cover crops, not been real successful with them. So I said, I'm going to send it up there and let him take a look at it. Now, the before, if you, and this is just when it should be non-treated area. If you see back in the foreground back there, that green line, this is where the Exodus was actually applied the last week in October, just south of the Twin Cities. So they struggle with getting a cover crop. We got this on there, and this is just stress mitigation. Now, this is irrigated southern Minnesota. We go to the next slide, and if that's on there, this is on a farm that I worked with. This is where there was no crop grown on this land last year. And so I went in last fall and I sprayed on the Exodus, and this was just a lot of grass and weeds and everything. And then I went in this spring. Now, this is not my farm, but I went in and I took a picture, and you can see how it actually helps decompose that. We're also looking at this to maybe help with soil-borne pathogens or residue pathogens that may be overwintering in the residue. That would be maybe a white mold spore, gray leaf spot. And we're thinking that this product here could actually use that as a food source and have that taken care of before we plant the next crop. Also, guys, strip tilling a lot of interest in guys strip tilling into corn on corn of having this product applied yet this fall.
Yeah, so this product, from what you're sharing here, Phillip, has tremendous potential to impact things kind of in a different mode than what we were originally thinking then, right? Because you're seeing stress mitigation in that crop in Minnesota.
And you have to realize that when those pictures there, that farm had I think he said 4 36 inches of rainfall since he applied the product last fall. So and going in there, we had some corn on corn, and I really couldn't see it in the residue, but you could see it in the difference in the health of the crop. Because, and he said, well, now don't feel bad because we've only had 4 inches of rain on this residue. So it as far as it breaking down like it had here in West Tennessee, because we had ample rain here, so it activated it. And so this was taken early spring here, and so you could see the difference. Up there, I'll tell you, I saw 0 difference in the residue, but you could definitely see it in the crop.
That's amazing. I mean, it just causes me to think, wow, how is that really impacting my soil profile? And, as we talked about building a system. We've talked about that for years. But I think if you look across the variety of things, Phillip, that you and Josh are making available through Genesis Ag, we're starting to look at how you can replace or resupply a lot of biology that's been kind of depleted in our soils with some of our typical soil application products. We're starting to move now into biologicals that can perhaps help us manage diseases, break down residue. I mean, we're really addressing more of a total soil food web scenario than anybody else in the marketplace today that I'm aware of.
Yes, Mark, and let me say this, and this was applied at 12 ounces. If I was in a southern soil, maybe warmer, both of these scenarios were 12 ounces because it's a new product. You might be able to use, a less application rate. This had no carbose in it. I'm thinking if we put carbose in it, it's going to help that biological activity kick in, because we try to tell people to be out there right after the combine runs over it, but very few people will do that. It's like this guy here, he waited till he got finished harvesting corn, went in and put it on this field where we showed the soybeans. Well, the corn residue had dried out. So that's why I would want the carbose with it at maybe a 6 to 8 ounce rate in this 12 ounces of Exodus. I'm going to say you're probably at a $15. And I don't know that you can plant a cover crop for $15, gentlemen. I mean, I'm getting ready to plant one in Tennessee, and you can probably multiply that by at least 5 to get a really good cover crop in.
Yeah. Very good. Well, thanks, Phillip. That kind of runs us through the majority of the things we had to cover tonight. We did have one question. Brian posed a question earlier. He asked, how much herbicide carryover have we seen in soybeans? I can't say that I've had any producers personally, Brian, make any comments that they've seen any of that. Phillip or Josh, have you seen much of that in anywhere that you've been?
Personally, Mark, I can't say that I've had guys that are looking at that, but I will tell you what breaks down herbicides is biology. So I think the more biologically active soil you have, the less carryover you're going to have. But it's like the guys in southern Minnesota that had very little rainfall in the winter. That rainfall, snow, whatever it may, helps mitigate that carryover. But I will just say probably the stronger biologically active soil you have is the less carryover you're going to have, because it's going to break down that chemistry.
I agree with that. That's one of the properties of carbose as well, is being able to break down those compounds by increasing soil biology.
Very good. Yeah. So yeah, I know that certain years that certainly becomes a concern for us. Sometimes if we go a few years without having that experience of having carryover, and it's pretty easy to forget about that. But when we have really dry conditions, certainly, especially with some of the different chemistries, it's certainly something we should keep in mind, and looking at what things we can do. Again, as you guys mentioned, a biologically active soil is a great mitigator of so many things. I think that's all I've got for tonight, gentlemen. I wanted to say thanks to everybody. I guess before I do that, maybe Josh or Phillip, do you have anything else that you'd like to say as we wrap things up tonight?
No, Mark, I'm good. You've done a good job.
I'm good as well.
Okay, very good. Well, yeah. So, gentlemen, thanks. I do appreciate your interest. You're taking time to tune in here tonight. Many of you, will try to be out and about, checking in with you through the fall. Do keep an eye on different treatments you might have done. Do me a favor, if you put in some side-by-sides or any kind of tests or any places where you're using our products, try to keep that in mind as you go to the field with the combine. I know we've got lots of things on our mind, but oftentimes we've taken time in the springtime or through the season, to put in different trials. And sometimes it can be easy to get preoccupied and forget to revisit those during harvest. Would ask you to maybe revisit that before you jump in the combine. What things might you have somewhere that you could keep an eye out for? And don't be afraid to give me a shout. Let me know how things are going, and where we might be able to help out. So we did have another question popped up here now. Any product that helps manage SDS in soybeans? And we kind of bounced across that a little bit. Obviously, Instago is one that we feel pretty strongly. We kind of talked a little bit about that in regards to its potential to work in the soil as well as a foliar application. And Phillip, you kind of alluded to maybe the Exodus being a little bit potential working on that. Could you talk a little bit more about how you see those two products maybe fitting or even in combination? What are your thoughts there? I mean, because that's gonna be something on a lot of people's minds this year.
Well, Mark, that pathogen is present, and look, I may be giving Exodus because that's just what I kind of feel like could be going on. When I say that's not a scientific guess, it's just a presumption on my part. So please hear and understand that. It's what I'm perceiving that product could be doing for us. So I have no scientific data to back that up yet. We hope to be able to get that. But if that pathogen's there, in this biology will feed on those negative pathogens and use them for a food source, that's the way it's designed. That's the way it's designed in nature if we have sufficient beneficials. we're seeing where guys are using the biological program in furrow on soybeans, we're seeing a healthier plant. We're seeing whether that be the carbos, the Revita N in the seed trench, where you're putting more phos in there with your soybeans, and all of those scenarios, you're increasing that plant's ability to withstand those pathogens within the root exudates, and how the biology contends with those, with a pathogen coming into the plant itself, how it builds that immunity to that pathogen. So all of those, Mark, are working in our favor. So I just say, when we look at this, it's kind of a complete plan of attack that you're working, and you're working with the biology to help that plant be as healthy as it can be. And that's really our goal.
Very good. Thank you for that, Phillip. So, Chris, is there anything we missed tonight that you can think of?
No, I don't think so. I think you covered it very well.
All right. Well, we've been a little bit over an hour. Really appreciate everybody tuning in and spending time with us tonight. Hopefully you found this beneficial. Maybe give you some things to think about as you're sitting in the combine or grain cart. And most of you have heard my spiel on doing ear assessments and ways to check things as when you get a few extra minutes in the combine, or when you're waiting on the combine or the grain cart. A lot of things, there's still a lot of information out here in our fields that we can gather as we go through harvest. So please don't think that the yield monitor is the only source of information available to you yet. So I just encourage you to keep looking at things that way. We'll sign off at this point. Tell everybody thank you. We do anticipate making this available for you to listen to again. Hopefully fairly soon we can get this uploaded back to YouTube or something like that if you want to revisit it. But again, if you've got any questions, don't be afraid to reach out to myself or anybody else here that's involved, and we'll try to get you the answers. And I just want to say thanks again. And most importantly, everybody, please have a safe harvest. Don't get in too big a hurry. It's much more important that we all get out of this safely and get to next year or so. Keep that in mind as we go forth, and have a blessed evening. Thank you so much.